Radio for Justice brings you up to the minute news and conversation around the criminal legal system in Colorado and beyond. Welcome to Up to the Minute.
I'm Tiffany McCoy from Colorado Radio for Justice. This week on Up to the Minute, it's part 2 of our conversation with Dana Flores. Dana is the Colorado Campaign Coordinator for the Youth Justice Team at the National Center for Youth Law. Last week, my co-host Trevor Jones and I spoke with Dana about Colorado House Bill 1146, which became law last month, and that bill's journey to becoming what she described as a better bill with amendments for more safety and support for young people. We also discussed her broader work to increase deflection and detention efforts that can help keep kids out of detention in Colorado. Let's pick up the conversation right there. When kids do get detained, where do they go? That's right now on Up to the Minute. This is Colorado Radio for Justice with Up to the Minute. I am your host, Tiffany McCoy.
And I'm Trevor Jones, co-host, and we are here today with Dana Flores to discuss issues regarding Colorado justice for juveniles.
What is considered jail? Because I feel like there are a lot of detention facilities for youth, so maybe there's a difference in what is jail and what is not. Because when I was young, there was like a lot of places we can go when we were arrested as a child. Are they just very small places, or is it not considered jail, some of these other places?
That's a great question. And I think that the truth is that what you're thinking of, the reality that existed in Colorado 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, is not the reality of today, which is to say that we don't have a quote unquote continuum of care for young people in the juvenile justice system. If you're going to be in detention while your case is pending, if you've been charged with something and you meet that standard I mentioned of posing a substantial risk of harm to yourself or others, or a flight risk if you're not detained, and there are no available services in your community that could mitigate that risk, then you go to a DYS, Division of Youth Services, detention facility. I think there's 14 that we have throughout the state of Colorado right now. And they're big, antiquated, to be honest with you, like kind of broken down, falling apart facilities that are outdated and that follow a model from, 1903, basically, that says like put kids in spaces that are just like the jails and prisons where we send adults. And that's what accountability looks like. Colorado is at a place, I think, where we've pivoted and we're like, no, true safety and justice and accountability means getting at the root causes of a young person's behavior. But we still over-rely, I think, on sending kids into DYS detention, thinking that that somehow is going to teach them a lesson, or just that it's going to contain their behavior for a period of time. And perhaps it would contain their behavior and physically contain them. These facilities look and feel and are jails, right? Like locked doors, bars. You can't open the windows. You're locked into a cell at night. Your movements are restricted. There's count, things like that. Not a ton of meaningful programming or services happening. You're just in detention, waiting for your case to resolve. We also have pretrial supervision through the Colorado Youth Detention Continuum. Largely, Colorado has interpreted that to mean replicating the conditions of detention at home. So like put a kid on a GPS ankle monitor, sharply restrict where they're allowed to go, make them come in to do urinalysis testing, to do drug testing, irrespective of what they were charged with and whether it has anything to do with drugs and alcohol, call that treatment. Subject them to a lot of really invasive assessments, make them report to a pretrial supervision worker with regularity, impose a lot of rules about like where they can go and whether they can move freely at school if they're allowed to attend school. Really like replicating the conditions of detentions, house arrest, basically. So what we don't have right now is what you mentioned, which is alternatives to detention that are small facilities. That would be where we want to go next, right? Like I think with the takeaway that we got from all the support that led to being able to pass a bill that really like elevates and scales up deflection and the kind of work that's happening in Longmont with Rewind, and tries to replicate some of those outcomes that we've enjoyed in Longmont, including it's a safer city, it's a safer place to live and raise your kids. We want to see that happening all over the state. And that means, I think, that we're also going to have to change the way we do business in the Division of Youth Services. We're going to have to elevate new leadership that's committed to decarceration and community reinvestment, moving some of the resources out of these kind of old school facilities that fail and moving those resources into communities, into like the community-based organizations that offer the services in all of those categories I mentioned, where deflected youth might go, and also recognizing that there's going to be a small number of kids that do need to be in a secure setting for a period of time, but there's no reason why that secure setting couldn't be a small house or dorm staffed by highly qualified, highly trained, highly paid professionals who have the heart and temperament to do this work and who want to be positive youth development specialists, not correctional officers, right? That's where the direction that many states have gone in the last 20 years, and certainly the states that have seen the most precipitous decrease in juvenile crime and increase in social determinants of health for young people and their families are the states that have really heavily leaned into shutting down big old school juvenile detention or juvenile incarceration facilities and getting that money that you save when you shut down those places back into the community, so that if there are kids in detention, they can be in a secure setting that doesn't look like jail, doesn't feel like jail, but does address the root causes of the behavior that brought that young person into contact with the system and gives young people a space to heal, reducing the likelihood that they will commit another crime or just suffer in the future, make anyone else suffer.
So while the kids are waiting for trial, can they get bonded out of jail?
It's an important question because Colorado is another area where I think Colorado's done a good job in basically eliminating the concept of bond for young people. So the presumption is that you get what's called a PR bond, a personal recognizance bond, meaning you don't have to pay money because your parent or guardian has to sign you out of detention, unless a judge has imposed a mandatory hold. And there's a kind of a long list of factors that judges at their discretion can impose to say, essentially, like, whether there's bail or bond is not the issue, this kid is not getting out. So while we do have young people suffering financial consequences from court involvement, particularly through restitution, which is mandatory on all juvenile cases if there's damage to property or persons that's monetary, there's going to be restitution that you'll owe at the time that you go to sentencing. But we don't anymore ask families to pay bail to get their kids out. However, if you don't meet that criteria that I named, like if the prosecutor can't demonstrate that you are a substantial risk of harm to yourself or others or a flight risk, and there are no mitigating services available in the community that would, limit that risk such that you could be home with supervision, you can still ultimately be released if your local Colorado Youth Detention Continuum, CYDC, this used to be called Senate Bill 94. It was established by Senate Bill 94, which passed in 1991. If you're interviewed by folks that work for, it's pretrial supervision. If they, in Denver, for example, come in, they talk to you a little bit, and it sounds like if you had a mentor and you had access to mental health support, behavioral health support, and educational support, that would mitigate the risk that you pose in their assessments to the community or to yourself. And an organization like Apprentice of Peace Youth Organization, or Young Improvements, or Fully Liberated Youth, or the Transformative Justice Project, TJP, has the ability to serve you now. If essentially if they don't have a wait list, if they can take you on as a client, then they can release you. CYDC can essentially ask the judge or any case party, your defense attorney, your guardian ad litem, your parent could ask the judge to release you from detention, get you out of a DYS facility and get you home. But that would be with the contingency that you would be engaging in services, or at least like building a relationship with an organization like one of the four I just mentioned.
One of the things that we talked about earlier was kids, officers not wanting kids to run away from them, and the fear that, for me, I was a kid that was scared of officers when I was a kid, and I was a kid that didn't want to deal with them. And I feel like that started with the way they treated my parents. Like, I feel like that started with the things you see of how officers treat adults. Have you heard that anywhere else? And like, what do you say to that, to people that say like maybe you should start with the way they treat adults?
I mean, what I can speak to is sort of my own experience in the past year, having a lot more conversations than I ever had before with law enforcement all over Colorado, and hearing a few things that seemed consistent. One of them is really obvious. I want to go home at the end of the day. I want to go home safe to my family, right? I do a dangerous job, but I don't actually want it to be dangerous, because not every day is like that. The other was, my time is valuable, and I want to spend my time addressing stuff that really poses a risk to my community. That's what I signed up for, right? Like, when I say I want to protect and serve, that's what I have in mind. I don't really want to spend my time alienating kids or their parents, right? That's not how I want to be viewed, and that's not what I want the reality of my day-to-day interactions with the community to feel like. And so I'm hearing a lot more willingness among law enforcement even to say, we have caused harm in the past. We don't have the data. We see now that like some of our tactics in policing, and also just the country we live in, the legacy of slavery, the systemic racism that is one of the defining characteristics of American society, is not lost on police officers any more than it's lost on district attorneys or the average 14-year-old kid in Denver, right? And I think there is like more willingness now for law enforcement to say, we're trying to be proactive about policing in a different way, and even repairing some of the harm that we may have caused in the past by, acknowledging where we've been getting it wrong and trying to embrace some of the recommendations that come to us from youth who have lived experience in the system, and families that have intergenerational trauma from, several generations being criminalized and having some level of contact with punitive systems. We're trying to hear that and have that inform sort of what practices we embrace moving forward.
Great. I appreciate that inside perspective from what you've experienced. So CRJ, we speak with people from the justice involved community every week, and we ourselves are justice involved. And to be honest, for the last several weeks, the tone and the demeanor has been a little bit down or sour, because there was something of a rough legislative session, some rough or denied bills, and obviously with some of the ballot initiatives from last year, we see that there's trends towards maybe drawing back or rolling back from some progress that had been made for options other than incarceration. But with how you're speaking, it seems like there's a lot of momentum with some data-driven progressive policies, and it's a refreshing take, to be honest. And I would maybe if you could speak a little bit to that, to what is pressing that or motivating that, and then also, if you don't mind, what motivates you? Like, why are you in this work, and what keeps you fighting these fights, because they are very difficult, as we all know.
Thank you for hearing like my tone and my enthusiasm, because that is really how I feel. I feel really optimistic about the future of youth justice in Colorado, and I think that's because I've had the incredible privilege of working with a statewide coalition of people that includes a lot of young people and a lot of adults who identify as directly impacted by the justice system, and who are willing to come together in community to build power and to think about how could we transform not just our youth justice system, but really all of our youth-facing systems, including education, right, healthcare, environmental justice, immigration, to build holistically a more fair and effective approach to supporting young people. And that kind of like movement building doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen, honestly, without some significant support from somewhere. And in Colorado, it's come both from the state, but increasingly as the state sort of struggles financially, it's coming from the philanthropic community and from big investments from foundations like Annie Casey Foundation, Public Welfare Foundation. And significantly, we've seen a big increase in Colorado funders like Colorado Health Foundation and Greg Scheckman Family Foundation and others investing in developing leadership among young people with lived experience around justice policy, specifically engaging that wisdom and expertise. And that's part of, I think, how we've been able to build the momentum where we were able to see the state embrace deflection and invest in it significantly, and at the same time see the legislature sort of roundly deny what could have been a successful bid to start sending more kids into detention. It's also why I think we're seeing more media attention to the realities that are taking place in detention. It's why we're seeing more coverage about things like young people dying of overdoses in DYS detention facilities, or young people experiencing broken bones after staff physically restraining them, and youth being held for weeks or months when they don't meet detention criteria because we don't have services available for them in the community, when in fact the reality is that there isn't a single agency or entity tasked with looking for those services. So you have all the service providers and community-based organizations saying, what are you talking about? We're right here. This is the work we do. We've always done this work. We can't get in. You don't see us as legitimate. You won't contract with us. We're banging on your door offering to help and you're not taking us up on it. So don't tell us there aren't services available. It's a question of like, we don't have the relationships yet where you trust us, or we can show you the data that you want, where you can start getting kids out of detention and getting them into community where we can wrap them with the support we have available. Also, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a statewide coalition grow from like 20 or 30 very committed people, but people that were by and large advocates already, right? Like they had full-time jobs, they were paid to do advocacy, whether it was legal advocacy like a juvenile defender or disability rights advocacy or something along those lines. Now we have a coalition that's 150 people, that's multi-generational, that's, you know, people from Alamosa and Durango and the 2 reservations and Greeley and Aurora and Arvada and Longmont and Denver and some like small towns on the Eastern Plains and Grand Junction and Mesa County and Glenwood Springs and, you know, many small towns on the Western Slope. All these people that have gift sets and skill sets and knowledge base that's different, so that we can talk about, is there justice by geography? Where are there places in the state where we should be directing that support from the philanthropic community or support from the state? How do we uplift practices that are working really well in Yuma, a really small town, really small school district on the Eastern Plains, and, you know, make that practice replicable or connect folks so there can be peer-to-peer learning from like an SRO in Yuma who's awesome and an SRO in Colorado Springs, District 11, who maybe needs that sort of peer-to-peer communication to be able to try something different.
An SRO is...
Sorry, as a school resource officer.
Thank you.
So police officer based in a school.
What is, where do you change from youth to adult? What is that age? 26, 24, 18? Well, I thought it was 18 for a long time, but what is it?
For me, I'll just speak to like my own memory of this, which is flawed. I don't really think that I had a sense of accountability, and accountability comes from relationships, not from rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that I had the respect for myself, my family, my friends, my community to really like interrogate my own behavior and to get the help that I needed to deal with my own issues until I was into my 30s. So for me, like that adolescent brain development that we're hoping will take place by your mid-20s really didn't happen until I was in my early 30s. And there's a variety of reasons for that that we won't get into right now. But I think it's different for every young person. I mean, in the fellowship, the policy fellowship that my colleague Philip Roybal and Thais Enriquez Banuelos and I co-facilitate together, where we're helping young people with lived experience in the juvenile justice system kind of learn the ropes of policy and begin to be active in policy spaces. We're defining eligibility as like 17 or 18 up through 26. So for sure, I would say organizationally, National Center for Youth Law and the funders that support the Lived Experience Advocacy Fellowship agree that youth extends to age 27. But I think it's a moving definition. It's an evolving definition.
I do believe we're coming up on a pretty quick stop. We like to always end these sessions with up to the minute, asking our guests, what are a couple of things that we should be looking forward to seeing maybe from you, or that you're hoping to see as policy development or anything like that?
Like I said, I think that we have an opportunity moment. There's this perfect storm of factors that are all coming together in Colorado. One of them, oddly, being that the state just doesn't have money anymore. We can't keep investing in policies that are expensive and bad for public safety. And locking kids up is incredibly expensive. It's $174,000 a year per kid in detention in DYS. By contrast, we spend like $10,000 a year per pupil in the public school system. The Behavioral Health Administration spends maximum like $20,000 per year for a kid who is at the highest end of the spectrum of mental health or behavioral health needs, who needs to be in residential treatment for an entire year. So that makes no sense. We're not getting good outcomes. Kids that go to detention are more likely to commit violent crime the minute that they're released, and in the future, going on for years to come. They're less likely to graduate high school. They're less likely to be gainfully employed. It's horrible fiscal policy, in addition to being bad public policy, right? It's not creating safety and accountability and justice. And finally, legislators and community stakeholders and system side folks and people with lived experience and service providers and faith-based communities are all coming together and saying, we can't keep trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We have to go in a different direction. And that direction is decarceration and community reinvestment. And it's following really like 23 other states that have gone that route and sort of shut down their big, overly punitive youth jails and prisons and moved young people closer to home into smaller, more humane facilities, like you were talking about, that might still be secure, but that don't necessarily subject young people to the conditions that they're currently experiencing inside the Division of Youth Services. And so I'm really excited about the potential for new leadership. The previous director had a long and storied career, and he retired in March, which there's a good person right now who's the interim director who is doing a fine job as interim, but I think we might see in the next few years new leadership, like sort of a bench of new leadership, step up to talk about, how could we be doing things differently? What does it look like to emulate some of the best trends in youth justice that are coming out of places like Utah, Illinois, Kentucky, Washington State, Washington, D.C., where I grew up. It used to be like the Missouri model was the only option for a better model in youth justice, a less punitive model and a model more conducive to safety and accountability and justice. And now it's much bigger than just Missouri. Now there's, 20 or 30 examples of jurisdictions. Sometimes it's a county, sometimes it's a state, sometimes it's a territory, where they're really getting it right. And they're seeing less youth crime and better outcomes for youth across the board.
If there are people out there that want to get involved and help or in any way, how can they do that?
I think the best way you can do it right now is by supporting a community-based organization in your local community or neighborhood that's working with young people. And if you're not sure what organizations are sort of worth your investment, that might be your investment of time as a volunteer. It might be a donation. It could be in kind. It could be any number of things, right? I would recommend talking to young people in your own family, talking to folks at the school district, talking to any community organization that you might be in contact with, and saying, like, do you know anyone who's doing good work with people who are age 0 to 25, right? Just look around a little. But again, like the state isn't in a position to provide a lot of systemic support right now. So we're going to be doing it ourselves in community, and that's okay. We know how to do this. So if you can give of your time, cool. If you can give of your money, cool. If you can do both, even better. and support our legislators and our system stakeholders and our youth correctional leaders who are trying to innovate and embrace practices that help keep young people safe and make communities safer by not sending kids into the juvenile justice system.
Okay. Is there any last words or anything you want to add to the conversation before we close today?
I hope we get to talk again. I mentioned that I work with a team, and I just kind of want to shout out the leadership of all of the young people on my team, because my immediate team is myself and Philip Roybal, who is the Director of Policy and Community Advocacy at Fully Liberated Youth, which is an alternative to detention program here in Denver. But now also my team is the 28 young people that have been through the Lived Experience Advocacy Fellowship and have fanned out all over the state and are doing all kinds of impressive things and stepping into their power and being innovative in the way that they approach policy in their local communities and at the state level, and for some of them at the national level.
Dana, thank you so much for your time. It was very informative, and we absolutely need you back. There's a whole lot more to talk about. But for today, this has been Up to the Minute. I'm Trevor Jones.
I'm Tiffany McCoy. Thank you for joining us on Colorado Radio for Justice with our guest, Dana Flores. Peace.
Up to the Minute is a production of Colorado Radio for Justice. Tune into our 24/7 broadcast on www.radioforjustice.org. Listen on the app from the App Store and Google Play. Catch this show and other original works shifting the narrative on the criminal legal system on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Colorado Radio for Justice.